Welcome back to Eternal Bible Stories, where we share real near-death experiences, stories that have the power to change your life. Today, I'm going to tell you one of the most terrifying stories we've ever received. She wasn't a murderer, she wasn't an evil person, yet when she died, she didn't go to heaven. Instead, she was dragged into a horrifying place she had never even believed existed, hell. Why would someone who thought she was innocent be pulled into the depths of hell? Had God abandoned her? But most importantly, what did she see that left her utterly shaken every time she spoke of it? This story might change the way you see life, death, and salvation forever. But be warned, what you are about to hear is not for the faint of heart. And now let's listen to her shocking testimony. I want to thank Eternal Bible Stories for giving me the courage to tell this story, because truthfully I am deeply ashamed of myself. After hearing my story, I do not expect your forgiveness, but I do hope you will be gentle with me. For this reason, I choose to remain anonymous. If anyone recognizes me, please keep silent. It is incredibly difficult for me to recount all of this, but I must. Not to justify myself or offer excuses, but because the truth, no matter how painful, is all that I have left. I know I was wrong. I know I lived in the worst possible way, thinking only of myself, of money, of fleeting success. I do not seek judgment, nor do I ask for pity. But if there is still a chance, if there is still a way for my voice to be heard, then I hope that someone will understand. My life was a well-crafted lie. I ran an online business selling cheap shoes from China, yet I marketed them as high-end, genuine leather footwear. I deceived my customers with enticing descriptions, edited images, and fake reviews. If anyone complained, I would dismiss them with phrases like, "You should have read more carefully," or "You misunderstood," or "I cannot refund you." I convinced myself that I was doing nothing illegal, that it was simply business. I made a lot of money. I traveled to luxurious destinations, dined at the most expensive restaurants, and indulged in every pleasure that money could buy. But I never once thought about my soul. I never worried about what would happen after I died. I believed that as long as I wasn't breaking the law, I had nothing to fear. And what about God? Yes, of course I had heard of him, but he had never been a serious thought in my mind. I rarely prayed, perhaps only in difficult times, and even then without real faith. Hell, just a fairy tale for those who needed fear to behave properly. I was not a bad person, just shrewd. I simply knew how to take advantage of opportunities better than others. I never imagined that the most beautiful moment of my life could turn into a tragedy in just a single second. That day I was enjoying a luxurious vacation at an extravagant resort, where everything seemed too perfect to be real. The sky was crystal clear, and the golden sunlight shimmered on the vast swimming pool, turning its surface into a mirror, reflecting paradise. The air carried the delicate fragrance of tropical flowers, blending with the gentle sea breeze, creating an atmosphere of absolute serenity. I told myself that I was living the happiest days of my life, wealth, status, and everything anyone could ever dream of. I could not have imagined that in just a few moments I would cross the boundary between life and death. Standing at the edge of the pool, I felt my body brimming with energy as I gazed down at the pristine blue water below. Jumping into the pool had become second nature to me, a movement so familiar that I could perform it without thinking. Nothing could go wrong. That was what I believed with absolute certainty. I took a deep breath, ready to launch myself into the air and relish the exhilarating sense of freedom as I dove into the cool, refreshing water. But at that very moment, I had no idea that fate was already preparing to strike me with a devastating blow. I leapt into the air, feeling the wind rush against my skin before plunging downward at a speed I had experienced hundreds of times before. But this time, something was wrong. The impact came before I even realized I had made a mistake. A tremendous force shot through my skull as my head crashed violently against the pool's bottom, sending a deep, muffled thud echoing inside my head. Pain exploded, like thousands of needles piercing through my brain, radiating from the crown of my head down every nerve in my body. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I couldn't react. Everything happened too fast, too suddenly. A blinding white light flashed before my eyes, burning through my vision for a brief moment. Then complete darkness swallowed me whole, dragging me into an abyss of nothingness. Yet I was still conscious. I still existed, even though my body no longer responded to me. I tried to move my limbs, but nothing happened, as if I had been severed from myself. I tried to listen, but there was no sound from the outside world. Only an absolute, suffocating silence pressed against me. A surge of panic flooded my mind as I realized I had lost all control. I could no longer feel the water around me, couldn't tell if I was floating or sinking, couldn't even be sure if I was still human or just a wandering spirit adrift in an endless void. And then I felt it. A terrifying coldness, not the coldness of water nor the chill of the night breeze brushing against my skin. This was something else entirely. A presence, unseen yet undeniable, touching me, seeping through every fiber of my being. It was so cold that it made me shudder, even though I no longer had a body to tremble. It felt like an invisible, icy hand caressing me, pulling me into a dimension I had never known before. The sensation was both eerie and foreign, as if I had been torn away from the world I once belonged to. In that moment, the horrifying truth dawned upon me. I was dead. I looked down and saw my own lifeless body beneath the water. My face was pale, my hair drifted weightlessly, and the lifeguards rushed in panic, pulling me onto the scorching tiles. Their hands trembled as they pressed on my chest, slapped my face and called my name, but I heard nothing. I felt nothing. I wanted to scream, to tell them I was still here, but I was powerless, trapped between life and death. Then I was no longer alone. A shadowy figure appeared beside me, its presence blurred and unearthly. It stood in silent observation, neither hostile nor comforting. Though its face was hidden, I knew it wasn't human. It extended a hand toward me, an authoritative yet eerie gesture. I could neither refuse nor retreat. The moment it touched me, everything dissolved. No light, no sound, just a vast, suffocating void. I no longer belonged to the world I had known. This was no dream, it was an irreversible truth. Darkness surrounded me, not just the absence of light, but a void so deep it consumed all existence. At first, all was silent, as if the universe had been frozen in time. Then, from an unseen distance, I heard a long, agonizing wail. A soft, desperate sob followed, filled with sorrow beyond comprehension. The rattling of chains echoed, dragging unseen souls deeper into the abyss. Though I saw nothing, I felt them. Thousands of unseen entities whispering in an incomprehensible language, their presence suffocating. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. I clung to the only source of faint light, my guide through this nightmare. But its glow was weak, barely pushing back the overwhelming darkness. In the distance, flickering lights emerged. At first, I thought they were fireflies, tiny beacons in the blackness. But as I focused, horror gripped me. They weren't lights, they were souls. I trembled, my voice barely a whisper. "What are they?" The figure beside me paused, its voice heavy with sorrow. They were once mine, but they let their faith fade into nothingness. Those words crushed me. These souls had once known light, yet they had lost the most precious thing, faith. Now they floated helplessly, unable to escape, unable to return. We pressed forward, but the air thickened and the darkness grew heavier, weighing on my soul. The cries around me became sharper, filled with unbearable agony. I felt as though I was descending into a place no soul should ever enter, and then I saw it. A colossal figure lying motionless in the shadows. It was not human, yet it bore a vague resemblance to a man, a giant body sprawled on its back, massive hands reaching toward the heavens as if pleading for mercy from an unseen force. Its fingers were like towering cliffs, and clinging to them were thousands of people, desperate, frantic, struggling to hold on. Some teetered on the edge, others were shoved forward, and many had already fallen, swallowed by the fiery abyss below. The horror struck me like a thunderclap. I wanted to turn away, to shut my eyes, but the nightmare was relentless. The screams, the suffering, the burning despair, it was all real, and in that moment, I understood. This was only the beginning. We ventured deeper into the endless darkness, and I lost all sense of time and direction. Suddenly, everything shifted. I turned around and found myself alone. A coldness unlike anything I had ever known enveloped me, and a primal, instinctual fear crashed over me like a tidal wave. The faint light that had guided me was gone. Then the sounds began. Behind me, a muffled groan, low, guttural, filled with suffering. Then, a soft, pitiful sob, as if someone was weeping in the shadows, pleading for mercy. Then came the most horrifying sound of all, the rasping, distorted breath of something no longer human. Something was moving in the darkness. At first, a chill crept down my spine, then a sudden jolt. Something or someone was pulling my hair. I felt claws digging into my shoulders, tearing into my flesh with merciless precision. I screamed and thrashed, but the more I struggled, the tighter their grip became. I lunged forward and began to run. I ran blindly with no direction, no sense of where I was going, only the certainty that if I stopped I would be ripped apart. "Jesus, where are you? Jesus, save me! I can't see you!" I screamed into the darkness. But there was no reply, only laughter, cold, cruel, and growing louder. Ahead, a narrow corridor appeared, stretching endlessly into the unknown. There were no walls, no clear path, just a tunnel of shifting darkness that seemed to tighten with every step. Flames flickered intermittently, casting brief glimpses of the horrors surrounding me. And then, in that flickering glow, I finally saw what was chasing me. Demons. Twisted, grotesque creatures, their bodies distorted beyond recognition. Their gaping mouths dripped with thick grayish-green saliva as if they had been starving for an eternity. Their breath was ragged, feverish with hunger, and their eyes, empty black slits, burned with pure, merciless hatred. Then a light appeared. A sudden, blinding radiance so intense it burned my eyes. Everything stopped. The creatures chasing me turned in sheer panic and vanished into the darkness. Before me, the light grew stronger, and deep within my soul, I knew who it was. I fell to my knees, sobbing, clutching at his robe. "Lord, why did you leave me alone? Why did you go away? Look at what they wanted to do to me. Please take me out of here. I don't want to stay in this place." But his face remained solemn, his gaze deep and unreadable, and I felt as if my pleas were not enough. "I never left you." His voice rang out, steady and unmistakable, cutting through every fear within me. "I was always with you, even in the moments you believed you were alone. I was there, even when you mistook my silence for abandonment. I never left you. But now, I want you to see something." He took my hand, and we stepped into a place unlike anything I had ever seen. The air was thick with a repulsive stench. The stone walls were covered in grime and mold. The ground was slick, murky, as though it was soaked in something alive and decaying. This place stretched out like a labyrinth of caves, filled with cells carved into the rock, an underground prison of tormented souls. I saw emaciated faces, their hollow eyes filled with ceaseless horror, their mouths open in silent screams. "Jesus, have mercy, get me out of here, I beg you!" The cries pierced through my very soul. But Jesus walked in silence, his expression unchanged, his eyes unwavering. I trembled. unable to look directly at the sunken faces behind the bars. But then I saw someone. In one of the dark cells, a familiar figure sat motionless. Her hair was white, her back hunched, as if carrying an invisible burden of pain. "Grandmother!" She turned to face me, and tears burst from my eyes. It was my grandmother. She looked at me with an expression of unbearable sorrow and despair. I gripped the bars, my chest tightening. "Grandma, why are you here? You did so much good. You helped so many people. You gave to the poor. You took in the homeless. Why are you imprisoned here?" I turned to Jesus, my voice breaking. "Lord, please give me an answer. Why is someone as good as my grandmother here?" Jesus looked at me, his eyes sorrowful yet firm. "Good deeds without me are meaningless," he said, his voice calm yet piercing. "She did many good works, but she never accepted me. She believed her actions could save her, but she never opened her heart to me. Worse still, she was an idolater. She worshipped whatever was placed before her, relying on objects more than on me. That is why she is here." His words struck me like a blow to the stomach. I thought back and realized the truth. My grandmother always kept religious statues, charms and talismans, speaking to them as if they held power. She had never truly sought Jesus. I looked at her, my tears flowing freely. "Grandma, you can call on Jesus now. You can repent. You can escape this place." She wept, but before she could utter a word, a shadow lunged toward her. A clawed hand reached for her, accompanied by a guttural, mocking laugh. Flames ignited beneath her feet, rising swiftly, licking at her frail body, consuming her in unimaginable agony. I screamed, trying to reach her, but Jesus held me back. "Works do not save," he said, as the nightmare before me unfolded into an inescapable reality. The scene did not change. Everywhere I looked, the darkness swirled in an endless vortex. Screams slashed through the air like daggers, and fire roared from the abyss. My grandmother cried out, but the darkness swallowed her whole. I collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably. Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder, his voice deep, solemn, like rolling thunder. "My child, there is no other name under heaven by which man can be saved except mine. No one can enter heaven simply by doing good. Only faith in me can save a soul." I shuddered. My grandmother had lost her chance for salvation. I kept walking, though each step felt like dragging a crushing weight. My soul sank deeper into the suffocating despair, but I knew my journey wasn't over. Then I saw something that stole my breath, a nightmare beyond anything I had imagined. 3 rivers stretched before me, separating realms of the damned. They weren't rivers of water, but of eternal suffering. The first, thick and crimson, was a stagnant pool of congealed blood, filled with shredded flesh and rotting corpses. The second, a black sludge of filth and decay, swallowed souls who fought to escape, only to be pulled deeper. But the third was the worst, a river of molten lava, consuming the damned in endless agony. Flames devoured them as they writhed in torment, their screams piercing the abyss. I thought I had seen the worst, until I saw the children. They were small, barely 7 to 12 years old, some just turning 10, but there was no innocence on their faces, only pain, terror, and absolute despair. They screamed, wailed, and thrashed, but no one listened. Demonic creatures dragged them across the ground, their claws sinking into their arms, legs, and hair, before hurling them into these dreadful rivers. Some were thrown into the river of blood, submerged in the thick crimson mire, struggling and screaming until they were swallowed into the darkness. Others were cast into the river of sludge and filth, clawing their way up but getting pulled down, their mouths agape in silent suffocation, drowning in the eternal filth and corruption. But the most agonizing sight was the children hurled into the river of molten lava. The moment their bodies touched the fire, their skin ignited, melting away in the unbearable heat. Yet they could not die. Their screams ripped through the air, shattering the void, but no one rescued them, no one answered. I was so overwhelmed with shock that I couldn't breathe, as if my soul itself was being suffocated by unspeakable horror. I turned to Jesus, my voice trembling, barely able to speak. "They're just children. Why are they here?" His gaze was sorrowful but unwavering, as if this was a truth I needed to witness. His voice was quiet yet powerful, carrying a depth of grief I couldn't comprehend. "It is not age that determines one's fate, but a heart that turns away from me." I froze. These children have walked in rebellion, choosing violence, deceit, and rejecting the teachings of their parents. They are the children of believers, yet they never truly sought me. I shuddered, feeling his words strike my heart like a hammer. I wondered how many children in this world had been taken to church by their parents but never truly believed in Jesus. How many had been raised by the world instead of being taught by their parents about God. I watched as the children were flung into the river of molten lava, saw them desperately trying to grasp onto anything, heard their screams as the fire consumed them, and I could bear it no longer. I sobbed uncontrollably, tears falling without end, my heart shattering under the weight of unfathomable sorrow. "Lord, please, stop this." But I knew I could do nothing to change it. We left the place of suffering, but my soul felt torn apart. I walked in silence, tears streaming uncontrollably as sorrow weighed heavily on my chest. The haunting cries of children still echoed in my mind, their tiny hands reaching out in desperation. They had screamed for God, pleaded for salvation, but the heavens remained silent. The further I walked, the deeper despair took hold, like an invisible force dragging me into an endless abyss. I didn't know where we were going, but something terrible awaited ahead. At last, we arrived at a massive staircase leading to a place where even darkness seemed afraid to tread. This was no escape, but a gateway to ultimate damnation. As I looked up, I saw it, a massive, pulsating heart, alive but inhuman. It throbbed as if absorbing the suffering of the condemned, each beat sending shockwaves through the air. The sight alone sent a shudder down my spine. At the top of the staircase, an open door loomed, a passage into unspeakable evil. A chilling laughter echoed from within, a sound so unnatural my soul recoiled in terror. The air vibrated, unseen objects crashed down, and the staircase trembled as if suspended over a bottomless void. Fear clamped onto my chest. I turned to seek Jesus, but he was gone. I was alone. The moment I realized this, the darkness moved. Demons emerged, grotesque, twisted creatures wreathed in smoke, their glowing eyes gleaming with malice. They carried chains and shackles, their monstrous grins stretching unnaturally across their faces. They stared at me as if they had long awaited this moment. I tried to step back, but I couldn't move. "Jesus, where are you?" I screamed, but only emptiness answered. My voice was swallowed by the abyss. The demons lunged at me, their icy claws digging into my arms and throat, chains wrapped around my body, pulling me to my knees. They laughed, their voices merging into a single ghastly chorus. Their whispers slithered into my ears, taunting, mocking, sending a chill through my soul. They dragged me up the staircase. Each step felt like an eternity, each moment drawing me closer to something beyond comprehension. My strength was gone, my will wavered. I was being pulled into the depths of despair. At the final step, a nauseating stench filled my lungs. The air thickened with black smoke, embers flickering through the dense fog, revealing a throne of darkness wreathed in fire and shadow. Seated upon it was Satan. His piercing gaze locked onto mine as he stood. "Welcome," he sneered, his voice calm yet filled with disdain. My body trembled, but I refused to look away. Every part of me screamed in terror, yet I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stand firm. I tried to call upon Jesus, but Satan merely smirked. "It's useless," he said mockingly. "There is no Jesus here." His words struck me like a blade, piercing my very soul. It wasn't just mockery. It was a force pressing down on me, suffocating the last remnants of my faith. My breath hitched, my fists tightened, but I refused to break. Though fear threatened to consume me, I clung to the only truth I had left. Even if I couldn't see him, I knew Jesus was here. I held on to that belief as if it were my only lifeline. I lifted my head, locking eyes with the one who sought to destroy me, and despite the terror in my veins, I spoke. "Jesus is always with me." The moment those words left my lips, the darkness trembled. The very fabric of the abyss began to shift, as if an unseen force was tearing through it. Satan's smug expression twisted into rage. A whirlwind of hellish fury erupted, the air howling as if the void itself was enraged. Shadows coiled, seeking to smother me one last time. But I no longer feared. For the first time, I saw something in Satan's eyes: fear. And then his form began to unravel, at first just faint wisps of smoke, but soon his entire being trembled, distorted, cracked. His presence lost its solidity, as if a single breath could scatter him into nothingness. His wrath turned to desperation, and I understood he had never truly held power over the name of Jesus. Everything that had once seemed terrifying began to collapse, like a nightmare vanishing with the dawn. The chains around me shattered, the darkness fractured, breaking apart into nothing. The entire infernal world crumbled before my eyes. I felt my body grow lighter, an overwhelming weight lifting from me. And then I fell, plunging into an endless void. But this time I was not afraid. No longer bound by darkness, no longer tormented by despair. This time I fell into the light. I opened my eyes once more, and immediately I felt the change. No more darkness, no more fire, no more chains tightening around my soul. The terror had vanished, as if I had just awakened from an endless nightmare. I knelt down, but this time it was not out of fear or despair. Beneath me was a vast field of grass, green and soft like silk, cushioning my knees as though woven from pure tranquility. The air was crisp, carrying a fragrance of purity. Not the stench of fire and sulfur, but the scent of life, of freedom, of light. I inhaled deeply, and for the first time after all I had endured, my soul felt as light as the breeze. I looked up, and he was there. Jesus stood before me, bathed in a radiance so powerful it could consume the entire world, yet so gentle it did not hurt my eyes. Pure, resplendent, indescribable. His light did not merely illuminate the space around him, it banished every last trace of darkness lingering in my heart. He was more beautiful than anything I had ever imagined, more powerful than anything I had ever known, and his love poured over me like a cool river, quenching the thirst of a soul desperate for salvation. In his presence, everything I had seen, everything I had feared, the screams in hell, the unending void, faded into nothing, for in front of me there was only his light. Tears streamed down my face like a flood, not out of fear but out of overwhelming emotion, gratitude and realization. I ran to him, clinging to his feet, pressing my face against the hem of his robe like a lost child who had finally found their father. I sobbed, my entire body trembling, because I was exhausted, because I had endured too much suffering, because I had witnessed things no one on earth should ever have to see. "Lord, I don't want to be there anymore," I choked out, clinging to him as if letting go would send me spiraling back into eternal darkness. "Please, save me." Jesus knelt down, gently touching me, and the moment his hand rested upon me, I felt a wave of coolness rush through my very being. Every pain, every fear, every torment from hell, everything dissolved as if it had never existed. I felt lighter than the wind, as though every burden I had carried had been completely erased. Never before had I known a love so pure. a love that could not be extinguished, could not be stolen, could not be replaced. His eyes were filled with mercy, tender yet filled with immeasurable power. I was never far from you. His voice was soft, yet it carried a strength capable of shattering all darkness. True faith is believing even when you cannot see me. In that instant, I understood everything, and it had never been clearer. Hell was real, but salvation in Christ was even more real. His love was stronger than any darkness, and His grace surpassed every condemnation. His victory was eternal, and no one could take it away from Him. I had no more doubts, no more fears, no more hesitation. I knew I was saved, not because I was worthy, but because He loved me, because His grace was sufficient even for the most lost. I remained there on my knees, tears still streaming, but this time they were not tears of sorrow. They were the tears of salvation. Today's story comes to an end, but the message it carries continues to echo. Brothers and sisters, if you have read this far, I want to ask you one thing. Please write in the comments the country you are listening from, or simply type Amen to prove that you have received this message and share your thoughts. This is one of the most moving testimonies I have ever heard, a powerful revelation that cannot be ignored. I plead with you, do not keep this testimony to yourself. Share it with all your friends, your family, in your groups, everywhere you can. Someone needs to hear it. Someone needs to know that hell is real, but salvation in Jesus Christ is even more real. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because we will continue to share messages that can save souls. This is urgent. This is eternal. Jesus is knocking. Now is the time to answer.